Yes, people. Now, next topic is related to the buyback of the shares. So, what will be the tax treatment in case of the buyback? So, there are two types of the buyback. First, understand if buyback of the shares of the domestic company, then what will happen? And if it is a buyback of shares of any other company, then what will happen? So, first, we are going to discuss the buyback of the shares of any other company other than domestic company. So, if there is a buyback of shares of any other company, in that case, what will be the tax treatment? So, in hands of company, there is no tax treatment, but in hands of the shareholder, obviously there will be a capital gain. So what will be the full value of consideration? Here full value of consideration will be the buyback price and minus cost of the acquisitions. Capital gain will be applicable in hands of the shareholder. But if there is a buyback of the shares of the domestic company, whether it is a listed or unlisted, earlier in this section there were only unlisted share, but from 5th July 2019, they included the listed share as well. So all people, please pay attention. If there is a buyback of the domestic company share, in that case, whatever buyback price minus issue price, whatever buyback price minus issue price, on that difference company will pay the tax at the rate 20%, 12% surcharge always, and 4% health and education cess. So what I am saying, that all people just pay attention. In case of the buyback of the share of the domestic company, whatever buyback price minus issue price, on that difference company will pay tax at the rate 20% plus 12% surcharge plus 4% health and education cess. Now question is that in hands of shareholder, is capital gain will be applicable? Answer is no. In hands of shareholder, now it is exempt totally due to the section 1034A. So 1034A, in hands of shareholder, it is totally exempt, and company will pay the income distribution tax under section 115QA at the rate the 23.296% on the difference between buyback price and issue price. Now try to understand this. In this section, they covered the listed share only from the 5th July 2019. On or after 5th July 2019, if there is a domestic company listed share is buyback, in that case, this particular provision of 115QA applicable. Now question is that suppose buyback announcement was already made earlier 5th July. Announcement for buyback made earlier 5th July 2019, but buyback is on or after 5th July 2019. Is this section 115QA is applicable or not? Answer is no. There is a clarification by the Finance Ministry. They are saying that if a buyback announcement is already made before 5th July 2019 and buyback on or after 5th July 2019, in case of listed share of domestic company, then this section 115QA is not applicable. In simple word, I can say that 115QA is applicable in case of the domestic company share, but listed share they included only from 5th July 2019, means announcement as well as buyback both should be on or after 5th July 2019. Then 115QA is applicable in case of the domestic company. Now from the date of the buyback, within 14 days they have to pay tax to the government, otherwise they will be treated as assessed in default, and from 15th day they have to pay the interest at the rate 1% per month or part of the month. Now next part is related to, sir, what will be the issue price in the different cases. Suppose if any ESOP is given, then what will be the issue price? Suppose if amalgamated company, like allotting share to the amalgamating company shareholder, what will be the issue price? In demerger, suppose resulting company issue the share, then what will be the issue price? So here lawmaker is saying that what will be the issue price in the different situation. For that purpose they issued one rule. They made one rule, that is rule number 40BB, and 40BB is having various situation. In that case, issue price is given. So first part, any share is subscribed by shareholder. Any share is subscribed by shareholder, what will be the issue price of the company? So in that case, issue price will be whatever amount received by company including the security premium amount. Whatever amount received by company including the security premium, that will be the issue price. I can take an example. One company issues share at the 70 rupees and face value is a 10. So what will be the issue price? Obviously 70 will be the issue price, because 60 is the premium and 10 is face value. So 70 rupees will be the issue price. Now try to understand. Second point is saying that suppose if before buyback company already written some amount. Suppose before buyback company already written some amount. Company issued the share at the 70. Last year company returned the 5 rupees to the shareholder. Then what will be the issue price? 65 will be issue price. Means whatever amount returned by the company, that will be reduced while calculating the issue price. But try to understand. Suppose whenever company returned that 5 rupees, that time suppose if company paid the taxes under section 1150, means the returned amount if treated as deemed dividend under section 222D, in that case obviously it won't be reduced. reduced. So I can take one example. Suppose company reduced the face value and they return the 5 rupees to the shareholder, but at the time of the return, suppose company paid the DDT under section 222D, that is decrease in share capital, and that was treated as deemed dividend under section 222D, and company paid the DDT under section 1150. In that case, issue price will be 70 only. In that case, issue price will be 70 only. Now question is that what will be the issue price in case of the ESOP and sweat equity share? So in case of the ESOP and sweat equity share, whatever FMV of the share or amount credited to the share capital and security premium, amount credited to the share capital and security premium, whichever is lower will be the issue price. Normally both amount will be same. So first point is the FMV of share, and second is the amount credited to the share capital or security premium, whichever is lower will be your issue price. Now next part is related to in case of the amalgamation. Suppose in case of amalgamation, if amalgamated means new company issued share to the shareholder of old company, what will be the issue price? I can take one example. Suppose there were one company, name was the Sai Limited. Sai Limited issued 1 lakh share to the shareholder of Sai Limited at the rate 70 each. So 70 lakh received by Sai Limited and 1 lakh share were issued by the Sai Limited. Now try to understand. Suppose Sai Limited amalgamated with Shirdi Limited, and now Shirdi Limited is issuing 1,50,000 share to the shareholder of Sai Limited. So question is that what will be the issue price of this 1,50,000 share? So here issue price of 1,50,000 share will be whatever amount received by old company. Means amount received by old company or Sai Limited was 70 lakh. So 70 lakh divided by number of share issued by new company. Number of share issued by new company is 1,50,000. So 70 lakh divided by 1,50,000, whatever amount, that will be the issue price of the share issued by the amalgamated company. You got my point or not? Yes. Now next part is related to in case of the demerger. In case of the demerger, I can take one example. Suppose there is one company, name is a Titan Limited. Now Titan Limited, what happened? Titan Limited suppose issued 1 lakh share to the shareholder of Titan Limited and issue price was 70. So 70 lakh was received by Titan Limited. Suppose after some time there is a demerger of Titan Limited, and Titan Limited is having two segments. One is the watch segment, one is the jewelry segment. Now jewelry segment they demerged and they made the one new company, that is resulting company, in the name of the Tanishq Limited. Now suppose Tanishq Limited issued the 20,000 shares to the shareholder of Titan Limited. So now question is that what will be the issue price of that 20,000 share? So here lawmaker is saying that how to calculate the issue price of that 20,000 share. So first take the whatever amount received by Titan Limited. So earlier amount received by Titan Limited was 70 lakh. Multiply by net asset transferred under demerger, divide by net worth just before the demerger. Suppose I can take an example that Titan Limited net worth was 500 crore. Out of that 200 crore transferred to the Tanishq Limited. So what will be the issue price of share issued by Tanishq Limited? So guys, try to understand. 70 lakh multiply by 200 crore divide by 500 crore. Whatever amount you received, that amount divide by that 20,000 share issued by the resulting company. That will be the share issue price of the resulting company share. Now question is that what will be the issue price of the Titan Limited share? So Titan Limited obviously received the 70 lakh minus whatever amount arrived for calculating issue price of the Tanishq Limited, just reduce that, and whatever remaining divide by 1 lakh share, that will be the issue price of the Titan Limited share. You got my point or not? Yes. Now next part is related to, suppose if any share is allotted for acquisition of asset or settlement of any liability. You acquired the asset and instead of paying by money, you are just issuing the share, or for settle the any liability you are issuing share. What will be the issue price? So here issue price will be FMV of asset or liability, FMV of asset or liability, FMV of asset or liability which is settled by issue of share. So FMV of asset of liability or amount credited to share capital or security premium, share capital and security premium, whichever is lower. So what I am saying that share is issued for settlement of your liability or in like acquisition of asset, then whatever fair market value of asset or liability, whatever fair market value of asset and liability or amount credited to the share capital and security premium, whichever is lower will be your issue price. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand. Sir, suppose if there is a conversion of proprietary concern or partnership firm into company. If there is a conversion of proprietary concern or partnership firm into the company, and now company will issue the share to the proprietor or partners. So now question is that what will be the issue price of the share issued by company to the partners or proprietor? So here you have to calculate the issue price. Just take the balance sheet on the date of conversion of that proprietary concern or partnership firm. Just take the balance sheet, and out of that balance sheet just first take the asset. And in the asset, take the book value of all asset, book value of all asset minus book value of liability, book value of asset minus book value of liability, whatever remaining amount divided by number of share issued by that company, that will be the issue price of per share. So what I am saying that at the time of conversion of your proprietary concern into the company or partnership firm into the company, then what will be the issue price of the share issued by company to the partner or proprietor? Your issue price will be, first take the book value of the asset on the date of conversion minus book value of the liability, what divided by number of share issued by company, that will be the issue price per share. Now try to understand, while taking the asset, don't take the advance tax, TDS and TCS. Don't take the advance tax, TDS and TCS, as well as the unamortized amount of the deferred expenditure also should be ignored. So while taking the asset, don't take the advance tax, TDS, TCS, as well as unamortized amount of the deferred expenditure. And in case of the liability also, you have to ignore the capital balance, reserve and surplus, provision for taxation, and uncertain liability provision. So provision for meeting uncertain liability or contingent liability, that you have to ignore. Now try to understand what I am saying, that like you have to ignore the TDS, TCS, advance tax. But suppose if there is an actual income tax refund, then you have to consider under the asset. You got my point or not? Yes. Now next part is related to what will be the issue price in case of bonus share. So in case of bonus share, obviously your issue price will be nil. In case of bonus share, your issue price will be nil, because at the time of buyback, your tax will be whatever buyback price minus nil. Issue price will be nil in case of the bonus share. Now next part is related to, suppose if any other instrument was issued, like debenture, bonds, debenture stock was issued, and now that is converting into share. Now you are converting that asset into share. Now you are converting that asset into share. So question is that what will be the issue price of the share? So here share issue price will be whatever amount you received earlier for issue of other instrument divided by number of share, you will get the issue price per share. I can take one example. Suppose one company issued the 1000 debenture earlier at the rate 100 each. Now they received the 1 lakh rupees. After some time they convert that 1000 debenture into like 10,000 share. So now what will be the issue price of 10,000 share? Whatever amount they received, that is 1 lakh divided by number of share, that will be issue price. Now next part is related to, suppose if company is going to buy back share from dematerialized form. Buyback share from dematerialized form is demat share they are going to buy back. So now question is that how they will find out the issue price. So just you have to follow the FIFO method, means whatever share issued first that share you are going to buy back. So just you have to take the FIFO method, and after that, in case of any other case, your issue price will be the fair market value of the share. So whatever fair market value of share, that will be the issue price. Now taxation of income of UTI and mutual fund units. So there is a one section 115R. This section is saying that suppose any mutual fund company or UTI only specified company, they distribute any income to the share unit holder, then they have to pay the tax like a dividend distribution tax. It is an income distribution tax. They have to pay the income distribution tax. Now what will be the income distribution tax? Try to understand. Suppose they are distributed to any foreign company or non-resident. They distributed to any foreign company or non-resident on the infrastructure debt fund, then they have to pay tax at the rate 5%. Suppose they are distributing on the equity oriented mutual fund unit, then tax rate is a 10%. Suppose they are distributing to any shareholder, like individual or HUF shareholder on any mutual fund or UTI scheme, then 25% tax. And in case of if like income is distributed to any person other than individual and HUF, then 30% is tax rate. So all people please pay attention. It is like a dividend distribution tax. Any mutual fund company or UTI specified company, whenever they distribute income to the unit holder, then they have to pay the income distribution tax to the shareholder. They have to pay the income distribution tax to the government. Now what is the income distribution tax rate under section 115R? First, if they are paying to the non-resident or foreign company on the infrastructure debt fund, tax rate is 5%. On equity oriented mutual fund, tax rate is 10%. On any other fund to individual HUF, tax rate is 25%. On any other fund to any person other than individual HUF, in that case tax rate is 30%. Now also this rate will be increased by 12% surcharge and 4% health and education cess. And here also gross up concept is applicable. Now question is that whatever income received from UTI or mutual fund by the unit holder, it will be taxable in hands of unit holder? Answer is no. In hands of unit holder, it is totally exempt. In hands of unit holder, it is totally exempt. In hands of unit holder, it is totally exempt. In hands of unit holder, it is totally exempt. Now next part is related to, they are saying that this section is not applicable if any like mutual fund is located in the IFSC and they distribute income on or after first day of September 2019, then this particular section is not applicable. Means that new mutual fund company is not required to pay dividend like income distribution tax if all the unit held by the non-resident. So they are saying that all specified fund means a mutual fund. So mutual fund if distribute on or after first day of September 2019 and that mutual fund derive whole its income in the foreign currency and they are located in the IFSC, and in that case there is no need to pay any like income distribution tax. Now question is that what do you mean by equity oriented mutual fund? So here equity oriented mutual fund means any mutual fund company, whatever investable fund, out of that investable fund, if 65% or more invested in the listed equity share of domestic company, if 65% or more invested in the listed equity share of domestic company, listed equity share of domestic company, listed equity share of domestic company, that fund will be known as the equity oriented fund. That fund will be known as the equity oriented fund. And second point, suppose if any one fund is invested in the another fund and that is 90% or more of investable fund, and that other fund invested in the 90% or more in the listed equity share of domestic company, in that case that fund will be treated as the equity oriented mutual fund. You got my point or not? Yes. Now next section or next topic is related to the political party. So political party income is basically exempt under section 13A. Now 13A is saying that obviously salary income is not possible for political party. Second is house property income, capital gain and IFOs. House property, capital gain and IFOs income is totally exempt for political party if political party satisfied some condition. But for business income, obviously business income is taxable for political party. Now what is the condition? First condition for political party, they should maintain the books of accounts and document. They should maintain the books of accounts and document. They should maintain the books of accounts and document. Second condition is that audit is mandatory for political party. They should require to audit their books of accounts from a chartered accountant. Third point is that suppose a political party received any donation, that is voluntarily contribution, and that donation is more than 20,000. If that donation is more than 20,000, in that case that political party required to maintain the record related to the donor. Means they are required to maintain record related to donor other than electoral electoral bond. Suppose they received any donation more than 20,000, in that case they are required to maintain the record related to the donor, but other than by way of the electoral bond. And next condition is that suppose a political party received any donation more than 2,000, more than rupees 2,000, then that donation should be received by the account pay check, account pay demand draft, any mode of electronic clearing system through bank account, or any other electronic mode as may be prescribed. We already discussed the any other mode may be prescribed in the capital gain topic. Any other mode may be prescribed is a NEFT, RTGS, IMPS, debit card, credit card, BHIM and UPI. That is the any other mode as may be prescribed. After that, now try to understand all people. Whenever you make the donation to political party, then you will get the deduction under section. You will get the deduction under section 80 GGB or JGC. For Indian company, section GGB is applicable. For other person, GGC is applicable. 100% deduction is available, but there is a condition that deduction under section 80 GGB and GGC is available only if donation is made by any mode other than cash. Now next topic is the electoral trust. Now this section is saying that section 13B. 13B says that whatever electoral trust received the donation in current year, electoral trust received the donation in current year, that will be exempt if they distribute 95% or more of donations received in current year or whatever accumulated from earlier year. For that 95% or more if distributed to political party in current year, in that case whatever donation they received in current year, that is totally exempt. That is totally exempt under section 13B. Now try to understand. Whenever you will make the donation to political party or electoral trust, you are going to get the deduction under section 80 GGB or GGC. Now next part is related to that electoral trust should not receive any donation in cash. Means electoral trust should be received or donation in the account pay check, account pay demand draft and all only. Now electoral trust can receive only donation from the Indian resident person. Means they cannot receive donation from any citizen who is not a any citizen outside India. Means in simple word I can say that if that person is not an Indian citizen, they cannot receive any donation, or they cannot receive donation from any other electoral trust. They cannot receive from the donation from government company, as well as they cannot receive donation from any foreign source. You got my point or not? Yes. Now next topic is related to taxation of firm and LLP. Now question is that sir, in income tax is there is any difference between firm and LLP? Answer is no. In income tax, firm and LLP LLP both are taxable at the rate 30% only. In income tax, firm and LLP both are taxable at the rate 30%. Is surcharge is applicable? Answer is yes. Surcharge is applicable at the rate 12% if their total income is more than 1 crore. If total income is more than 1 crore, then surcharge is applicable at the rate 12%. Health and education cess is applicable at the rate 4%. Health and education cess is applicable at the rate 4%, and tax rate is 30% for the partnership firm. Now try to understand, in case of partnership firm, if partnership firm pay the tax, then whatever share in profit to the partner, share in profit to the partner is totally exempt under section 10(2)(a). Means whatever share received by partner from partnership firm, that share is totally exempt in hands of the partner. In hands of partner, that share is exempt. But now try to understand whatever remuneration interest given by the partnership firm to the partner. So whatever remuneration interest is allowed to partnership firm under section 40B, that remuneration interest will be taxable in hands of the partner under the head PGBP. So whatever interest or remuneration received by partner from partnership firm and that is allowed to partnership firm, that will be taxable in hands of the partner. Now next section is related to 40B. 40B is saying that what amount of remuneration or interest is allowed to the partnership firm whenever they pay to the partner. So all people please pay attention, there are 5 conditions. First condition is that remuneration is allowed only if remuneration is paid to the working partner. If remuneration is given to the sleeping partner, then remuneration is not allowed. Remuneration is allowed only if remuneration is paid to the working partner. Working partner should be individual only, and any individual can be a working partner in more than one firm. I am a working partner in the 3 firm. Is it possible? Answer is yes. So what I am saying that all people just pay attention. First condition, remuneration is given to the working partner, it is allowed. Remuneration given to sleeping partner, it is not allowed. And working partner can be an individual only, and individual can be a working partner in more than one firm also. No problem at all. Now next part is related to remuneration and interest allowed only if it is authorized by partnership deed. Remuneration and interest is allowed only if it is authorized by partnership deed. Only if it is authorized by partnership deed. Here authorized means it should be like if interest and remuneration should be mentioned in the deed. Remuneration and interest should be mentioned in the deed, then only it is allowed as deduction. Now try to understand, remuneration and interest will be allowed only if it is provided prospectively. It is provided prospectively. If it is provided retrospectively, then it is not allowed as deduction. I can take an example. Suppose we 3 are the partner, A, B, C, 3 are partner. In their partnership deed, they have not mentioned anything about remuneration and interest. Today in the month of the October, suppose they are going to amend the deed and they are providing remuneration interest from 1st April 2019 or 1st April 2020. Is it allowed? Answer is no, it is not allowed. Whatever, suppose if they are amending deed from today, so whatever remuneration interest provided on or after today, that will be allowed, but retrospective is not allowed. Next part is related to, sir, is interest there is any limit? Answer is yes. In interest, maximum interest on partners' capital and partners' loan. What I am saying that maximum interest on partners' capital and partners' loan is allowed at 12% per annum simple interest. 12% per annum simple interest. 12% per annum simple interest. 12% per annum simple interest rate interest is allowed. Now try to understand one more thing. Remuneration, what is the limits? For remuneration, there is a limit that remuneration is allowable on the basis of the book profit. First, you have to calculate the book profit. Now, what do you mean by the book profit? Book profit means calculate the PGBP income but just before remuneration. Take the PGBP income but just before the remuneration, that is called your book profit. On book profit, first 3 lakh book profit will be multiplied by 90% or 1,50,000, whichever is higher, and whatever balance book profit, that will be multiplied by the 60%. That is called your allowable remuneration amount. That is called your allowable remuneration amount. So what is the allowable remuneration amount? All people just pay attention. Book profit, first take the 3 lakh book profit. It will be book profit multiplied by 90% or 1,50,000, whichever is higher, and balance book profit will be multiplied by 60%. That is called your allowable remuneration. Suppose your actual remuneration is less than allowable remuneration, then total actual remuneration will be allowed. But suppose your actual remuneration is more than allowable remuneration, in that case whatever allowable remuneration, that will be allowed under section 40B. Now guys, try to understand, in case of the book loss also remuneration is allowed 1,50,000. In case of the book loss also remuneration is allowed 1,50,000. You got my point or not? Yes. Now next part is related to, all people just pay attention, while calculating the book profit, just remember one thing. They are saying that you have to calculate the book profit by section 28 to 44. Means book profit means PGBP income as per section 28 to 44. It means if there is any unabsorbed depreciation of earlier year, because unabsorbed depreciation is governed by section 32(2). So you have to reduce that unabsorbed depreciation. So what I am saying that book profit means just calculate the current year PGBP income. Just calculate the current year PGBP income, and if remuneration is already deducted, just add back. And if there is any brought forward unabsorbed depreciation, just reduce that. Whatever remaining, that will be your book profit. Now try to understand one more thing. Sir, suppose if any person is a partner in partnership firm on the individual capacity. If any person is a partner in partnership firm on individual capacity and he is receiving interest on representative capacity, in that case section 40B limit, that 12% limit is not applicable on that interest. What I am saying that, suppose if any person is a partner in partnership firm on individual capacity and he is receiving interest, this is only applicable for interest. He received interest on representative capacity, on that interest the section 40B limit is not applicable. Means even if it is more than 12%, it will be allowed as deduction. Second point, if any person is a partner in a partnership firm, on representative capacity, but he received the interest on individual capacity, then also section 40B limit of 12% is not applicable. Even more interest will be allowed as deduction. Means in simple word, I can say that 40B limit is applicable only if the person is a partner in partnership firm on individual capacity and received interest on individual capacity, and or he is a partner in partnership firm on representative capacity and he received the interest on representative capacity, then only this section is applicable. Otherwise this section is not applicable. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand. This basically limit that particular concept, this explanation is applicable only for the interest, not for the remuneration. So suppose a partner received the remuneration, whether he is a partner on individual capacity or representative capacity, 40B limit will be applicable on that remuneration. Now section 78 says that in partnership firm, suppose if any partner is retired or if there is a death of any partner. If any partner is retired or death of any partner and there is a change in constitution of partnership firm, then whatever loss related to that partner, whatever loss, or I can say that partner's share in loss, that loss cannot be carried forward by that partnership firm as well as that partner. So what I am saying that all people please pay attention. There is a death of partner or any partner is retired from partnership firm. In that case, whatever share of that partner in loss, that loss cannot be carried forward or set up by the partnership firm. That loss cannot be carried forward or set up by the partnership firm as well as the partner. Now next section is section 184. 184 is saying that assessment of partnership firm. When any partnership firm will be assessable as partnership firm if three conditions are satisfied. First condition, there should be a partnership deed. Second condition, that PSR should be mentioned in the deed. And third condition is that saying that first partnership deed should be attached or should be furnished with the first return of partnership firm. But in the practical life, that partnership deed is only furnished whenever assessing officer asks for the partnership deed at the time of the assessment. Generally, we never attach the partnership deed with the return because we normally file the online return, so there is no option to attach the deed. But section 184 is saying that there should be a partnership deed, PSR should be mentioned, and deed should be attached with the return of income. Now suppose if there is a violation of 184, then 185 says that whatever, if there is a violation of 184 or partnership firm commit any default mentioned under section 144, that is bad judgment assessment, in that case whatever remuneration or interest paid to partner, it is not allowed to partnership firm. Means 40B is not applicable, it is not allowed to partnership firm, and when it is not allowed to partnership firm, then obviously it is not going to be taxable in hands of the partner. Now next section is section 187 is related to change in constitution of firm. What do you mean by change in constitution of firm? So here change in constitution of firm means any partner is retired or any partner is admitted. If any partner is retired or any partner is admitted, but at least one partner, that earlier partner should continue in the firm, that is called change in constitution of firm. Or I can say that suppose all partner are continue but their respective share is changed. Respective shares is changed, that is also called is your change in constitution of firm. Now what is the meaning of succession of firm? If any case is not fall under change in constitution, that will be treated as a succession. Suppose ABC partnership firm is now become the DEF, means all partner retired, all three new partner are came, that is called succession of firm. Now try to understand, in case of the succession of firm, there will be a two return of income for that year. One is for successor and one is for predecessor. But in case of the change in constitution of firm, there will be only one return. Now next section is section 188A. 188A is saying that joint and several liability of the partner. If any person is a partner in a partnership firm on any particular date, then for that year liability, that partner is a jointly and severally liable. I can take one example. Suppose ABC are doing the business in the partnership from last 20 years. Suppose I was partner for the current year, and after that in current year I was partner for only 10 days. After that I retired from that partnership firm. So current year liability is I am liable. Answer is yes, I am liable. Last 20 year liability, only 3 were liable. I am not liable for last 20 years liability. But there is one exception, that is called section 189. 189 is saying that in case of the dissolution, in case of the dissolution or discontinuation of business or partnership firm, whatever partner available on the date of discontinuation or dissolution, means partner on the date of dissolution or discontinuation, that all partner are responsible, for whatever liability of partnership firm. Means suppose I can take one example. ABC are doing the business in partnership from last 20 years. Today I became the partner, but after 3 days, suppose there is a dissolution of partnership firm. So here the section 189 says that I am also responsible for last 20 year liability. I am also responsible for last 20 year liability. That is the section 189. And section 167C is saying that in case of the section 167C is that saying that in case of the LLP also partner liability will be unlimited. As per LLP Act, partner liability is limited, but for the purpose of income tax, partner liability will be unlimited. Partner's liability will be unlimited. You got my point or not? Yes. Chalo. Thanks a lot. Yes, people, next topic we are going to revise the MAT, that is called minimum alternative tax. Now, MAT is applicable to only company, means it is applicable to company. Company means Indian company, foreign company, domestic company, non-domestic company, government company, non-government company, listed company, unlisted company. So, MAT is applicable to basically all companies. Now, there is a one section 115JB. 115JB is saying that whatever tax as per the normal provision of income tax or 15% of the book profit, whichever is higher, company required to pay. What I am saying that tax as per the normal provision, here tax as per normal provision means 25% or 30% of the total income or 15% of book profit. 15% of book profit is known as the MAT. Whichever is higher, company required to pay. Now try to understand, this book profit will be treated like a total income only. Here book profit is more than 1 crore. Then surcharge is applicable at the rate 7% or 12%, 7% or 2%. And if book profit is more than 10 crore, then surcharge is applicable at the rate 12% and 5% in the case of the domestic company or foreign company respectively. After that, sir, question is that MAT rate is a 15%. Answer is yes. Earlier it was 18.5%, but for your examination, MAT rate is 15%. Now try to understand, if your unit is located, your company is located in the IFSC, that is International Financial Service Center, and your income is totally in the convertible foreign exchange, in that case your MAT rate will be 9% instead of the 15%. But very important part of this topic is how to calculate the book profit. Sir, how to calculate the book profit? So first take the net profit as per the profit and loss account. But profit and loss account as per Income Tax Act or Companies Act? Right answer is Companies Act. Companies Act Schedule 3 P&L you have to take. First take the P&L as per the Companies Act, Schedule 3 P&L, profit and loss account. Just take the P&L of Schedule 3 as per the Companies Act. But sir, there are various companies, they are not preparing their account as per the Companies Act. One is the electricity company, banking company and insurance company. Electricity company, banking company and insurance company, then for that companies, lawmaker is saying that take the whatever profit and loss account, prepare as per that respective act. So whatever respective act P&L you have to consider for calculating the book profit. Now try to understand, you have to take the P&L, whatever P&L you have presented in your AGM, means whatever profit and loss account, statement of profit and loss account presented in front of the AGM, in front of the shareholder in AGM, that same P&L you have to consider for calculating the book profit. Now try to understand, you are just taking the P&L as per Schedule 3. Schedule 3 P&L as per Companies Act. Now you have to add some item and you have to reduce some item. You have to add some item, you have to reduce some item, you will get your book profit. First, all people please pay attention. Just check the debit side. In the debit side, if any income tax interest, education cess, surcharge, DDT is debited, just add back. What I am saying that income tax interest, education cess, surcharge, DDT debited to P&L account, just add back. Now second part, if any transfer to any reserve, any amount transferred to any reserve debited to P&L account, just add back, it is not allowed as deduction. So first point, all people just pay attention. First point is saying that any income tax interest, education cess, surcharge and DDT, you have to add back. You have to add back. Second, transfer to any reserve. Transfer to any reserve means any reserve, transfer to any reserve, you have to add back. Now try to understand. Suppose in credit side of the P&L, if transfer from any reserve is credited to P&L account, transfer from any reserve is credited to P&L account, obviously you have to reduce that, because when you transfer to reserve, it is not allowed, then whatever credited to P&L from any reserve, then obviously it has to be reduced. So all people just pay attention. What I am saying that, okay, transfer to any reserve, just add back. Transfer from any reserve, you have to reduce. But try to understand. Transfer from any reserve, you will reduce only if that reserve was created through P&L. If that reserve was created through P&L, then only you will reduce. Otherwise, there is no need to reduce. Now, can you give me any example of reserve? That reserve is not created through P&L account. That is the revaluation reserve. So basically, revaluation reserve is not created through P&L account. So all people just pay attention. Three adjustment we already discussed. First, income tax interest, education cess, surcharge, DDT debited to P&L account, just add back. Transfer to any reserve, just add back. Transfer from any reserve, you have to reduce if that reserve is created through P&L account. Now try to understand one more thing. In debit side of the P&L, if any provision is made for the contingent liability or uncertain liability, what I am saying that contingent liability or uncertain liability, that should be add back. Provision for the contingent liability or uncertain liability. Now try to understand if that provision is made as per the actuary valuation or as per the scientific basis, rational basis, in that case it is allowed as deduction. There is no need to add back. So what I am saying that in P&L debit side, if any provision is debited, provision for the contingent liability or uncertain liability, it has to be added back. Provision for the contingent liability or uncertain liability, add back. Second is provision for the diminution in the value of asset. So in the debit side of the P&L, if there is a provision for the diminution in the value of asset, just add back. Now in the P&L credit side, if any income is credited and that income is exempt under section 10, 11, 12, what I am saying that income is exempt under section 10, 11, 12, just reduce that. Any expenditure related to that income is debited to P&L account, just add back. Any expenditure related to that income debited to P&L account, just add back. Now try to understand if any dividend is paid or proposed is debited to P&L account, just add back. Next point, if any loss of subsidiary company is debited to P&L account, just you have to add back. Loss of subsidiary company debited to P&L account, you have to add back. Now next part, depreciation. Given in the P&L debit side, just add back. Total depreciation you have to add back. Whatever total depreciation debited to P&L account, just add back. Total depreciation you have to add back. Now question is that is depreciation will be allowed? Answer is yes. You can reduce the depreciation, not as per income tax. No baba, no. Here while calculating book profit, there is no reference or interference of the Income Tax Act. Just you have to making some adjustment. You are making some adjustment in the P&L as per Companies Act only. There is no interference of the income tax and all. So all people just pay attention. What I am saying that okay, whatever depreciation debited to P&L account, total depreciation add back. Just add back the total depreciation. Is depreciation will be allowed? Answer is yes. Depreciation is allowed. You will reduce the depreciation as per Companies Act only, but excluding depreciation on revalued asset. Excluding depreciation on revalued asset, you have to reduce. Excluding depreciation on revalued asset, you have to reduce. Now try to understand one more thing. Okay, suppose sir, we have credited something to the P&L credit side from revaluation reserve. Means we are withdrawing something from revaluation reserve and it is credited to P&L account. So question is that whatever withdraw from revaluation reserve credited to P&L account, is it allowed to reduce? Answer is no. But here a lawmaker is saying that all people just pay attention. Suppose if you withdraw anything from revaluation reserve, you can reduce, but to the extent depreciation on revalued asset. To the extent depreciation on revalued asset, you can reduce. Suppose for an example, in your current year, your depreciation on revalued asset is 100. Suppose you withdraw from revaluation reserve is 80, you have to reduce 80. Suppose you withdraw 100, you have to reduce 100. Suppose you withdraw 130, you have to reduce only 100. You withdraw 130, you have to reduce only 100. That is transfer from revaluation reserve will be reduced, but only to the extent depreciation on revalued assets. So all people just pay attention. Whatever depreciation debited to P&L account, just add back. Whatever depreciation debited to P&L account, just add back. Now depreciation will be reduced, excluding depreciation on revalued asset. But whatever transfer from revaluation reserve, that will be reduced. But to the extent depreciation on the revalued asset. You got my point or not? Yes. Now next part, all people just pay attention. Suppose company receive any share from AOP BOI, that has to be reduced, and expenditure related to that share debited to P&L account, just you have to add back. Now suppose company receive any royalty on the patent, and on that patent is taxable under section 115 BB. That is 115, just I just forget that section, 115 BB, there is one section here, 115 BB. So if any royalty received by the company under section 115 BBF and credited to P&L account, just you have to that royalty, and any expenditure related to that royalty debited to P&L account, you just have to add. Now next part, all people just pay attention. If any foreign company received any capital gain on security, or any interest, royalty, fees for technical service taxable under section 115A, and rate on this income means rate under income tax on capital gain on security and interest, royalty, FTS, if that rate is less than MAT rate, means less than 15%, and credited to P&L account, just you have to reduce that. But this is applicable only in case of the foreign company. And expenditure related to this type of income debited to P&L account, just you have to add back. All people just pay attention. Again, I am like explaining this point. Okay, in case of foreign company, if there is a capital gain on any security, or interest, royalty, fees for technical service referred under section 115A, and tax rate on this income is lower than 15%, credited to P&L account, just you have to reduce. And expenditure related to that income debited to P&L account, just you have to add back. If deferred tax debited to P&L account, just add back, and credited to P&L account, just you have to reduce. Any sick industrial company profit will be reduced. Sick industrial company means a company, in that company cases, if your accumulated losses is more than net worth, that is called sick industrial company. So in case of sick industrial company, obviously MAT is not applicable, so you just have to reduce the profit of that particular company. Now try to understand, lawmaker is saying that whatever your accumulated losses, means brought forward losses or unabsorbed depreciation, whichever is lower, you can reduce. Whatever your unabsorbed depreciation and brought forward losses, you can reduce. Now here unabsorbed depreciation and brought forward losses means brought forward losses should not include the depreciation. You have to separate the brought forward losses and unabsorbed depreciation, whichever is lower, you will reduce. Suppose your unabsorbed depreciation is 10 lakh, brought forward losses is 8 lakh, you will reduce the 8 lakh. Suppose your unabsorbed depreciation is 10 lakh but brought forward losses is nil, you will reduce the nil, means nothing will reduce. But try to understand, in case of two company, one company, if company's application for insolvency resolution process, that is IBC, insolvency and bankruptcy, in that, if application is admitted of that company, if application is admitted under section 7, 9 or 10, in that case, as well as in case of company or subsidiary of that company, or subsidiary of that company, if section 241 or 242 of Companies Act 2013 is applicable, means management is corrupt and all, in the both cases, you will eligible to reduce the brought forward losses and unabsorbed depreciation. Means you have to just take, not whichever is lower, just take the total of unabsorbed depreciation and brought forward losses, you can reduce that. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand one more thing. Lawmaker is saying that if any asset is transferred or any asset is retired, and any amount related to that asset in the revaluation reserve, any amount related to that asset in the revaluation surplus or revaluation reserve, basically, at the time of transfer or sale of that asset or retire of that asset, you have to credit that revaluation balance to the P&L credit side. You have to credit that revaluation balance to the P&L credit side. Suppose if you have not credited, then it has to be add back. Suppose it is not credited, then you have to add while computing the book profit. You have to add while computing the book profit. You got my point or not? Yes. Now next part is related to, suppose in case of business trust, you are the sponsor, means you are sponsoring the business trust. Now sponsor means, suppose a sponsor is having the SPV shares and now he is getting the business trust unit in exchange of SPV share. So at the time of exchange of SPV share with the business trust unit, if there is any notional gain or loss, on notional gain or loss, MAT is not applicable. So if any notional loss is debited to P&L account, just you have to add. If it is credited to P&L account, you have to reduce. But at the time of transfer of units of business trust, if there is an actual gain or loss, on actual gain or loss, total actual gain or loss, MAT will be applicable. So on total gain you have to add and total loss you have to reduce. You got my point or not? Yes. This is the completion of your book profit calculation. Now try to understand, if any company follow the Ind AS, that is Ind AS compliant company. So in case of the Ind AS compliant company, there are some further adjustment is also required in the book profit. There are some further adjustment is also required in the book profit. So all people just pay attention. There are two type of the adjustment. One adjustment is every year adjustment and one is the one time adjustment. First we will discuss the every year adjustment. So for every year adjustment, all people just pay attention. If company is a Ind AS compliant company, means company follow the Ind AS, in that case what you have to check, all people just pay attention. Just first take the OCI. OCI means other comprehensive income account. OCI is a basically separate account than P&L. A profit and loss account means income and like profit and loss statement is separate, OCI is a separate. So just check the OCI, and in OCI there is a one head, and that is item that will not be reclassified to P&L account. What I am saying, that just take the OCI, and in OCI there is a one head, that is item that will not be reclassified to the P&L account. Means if there are certain item and that will be reclassified to P&L account, then obviously MAT will be applicable in the year in which that item will be reclassified to the P&L account. But suppose in OCI there is some item and that item is not to be reclassified to the P&L account, means that item will never be reclassified to the P&L account. So here lawmaker is saying that do one thing, just pay the MAT on that item in the current year. So in the OCI account, just check the OCI account. In OCI, there are certain item, and that item which not be reclassified to the P&L account, if that item is credited to OCI, just add that while calculating book profit. And if it is debited to P&L account, just reduce that. It's so simple. Just take the OCI account. In OCI, there are certain item which will not be reclassified to the P&L account. If it is credited to the OCI, if it is credited to the OCI, it is an income. So just add that. If it is debited to OCI, then just reduce that while calculating the book profit. But you have to skip the two item. You have to skip the two item. One is the revaluation surplus. One is the revaluation surplus, and second is a gain from change in fair value of equity instrument through OCI. So you have to ignore the two item. One is the revaluation surplus and second is gain or loss from change in the equity instrument designated through OCI on the fair value. You have to ignore this two item. Now you are saying that, sir, you are saying that revaluation surplus and that equity instrument through OCI, you have to ignore that. Means MAT is not applicable on this item. Answer is yes, MAT is now not applicable. But whenever you will transfer that asset, retire that asset, dispose that asset, realize that asset, in that year, whatever aggregate gain, just add that aggregate gain while calculating book profit, and there is a loss, then just reduce that loss. What I am saying, that you understood or not? Yes, all people just pay attention. First take the OCI, and in OCI, there is a one head or one item, that is item that will not be reclassified to P&L account. Just take that item. If it is credited to OCI, just add that. If it is debited to OCI, just reduce that. But two item, you have to skip two item. One is the loss or gain in change in fair value of equity instrument designated at fair value through OCI. You have to ignore that, and revaluation surplus. In revaluation surplus and that gain or loss on the equity instrument designated at fair value through OCI, if this two item, MAT is applicable in the year in which you transfer, retire, dispose or realize that asset. So in the year of transfer, in the year of retirement, disposal or transfer, if there is a gain, just add while calculating the book profit, and there is a loss, then just reduce that. If there is a gain, just add that. If there is a loss, then just reduce that. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand in the case of the demerger. In case of the demerger, what happened? All people please pay attention. In case of demerger, we can take one example. In case of demerger, suppose there is one company name is a Titan Limited. Titan Limited is one segment, name is a Tanishq Jewelry. Suppose Tanishq Jewelry is demerged, and at the time of demerger, book value of Titan asset was 200 crore. But as per Ind AS compliant, suppose on that date fair market value was 250 crore. So as per the Ind AS 10 Appendix A, you have to recognize the 50 crore as a profit, because in FR or in account, You always say that it is treated as non-cash asset distributed to shareholder. It is treated as distribution of non-cash asset to shareholder. Demerger is treated as distribution of non-cash asset to the shareholder. So as per the FR, obviously that 50 crore profit you will recognize to P&L credit side. Or suppose if there is a loss, means book value was 200 crore, at the time of transfer fair market value is 150 crore, so 50 crore is loss, obviously you will debit to P&L account. Here lawmaker is saying that in this situation, MAT is not applicable on that 50 crore loss or gain. So suppose loss is debited to P&L account, you have to add, and gain is credited to P&L account, you have to reduce. This is called every year adjustment. Now next part is related to the 1 year adjustment, that is called transition amount. That is called transition amount. Now guys, try to understand in case of the transition amount. Now what is the meaning of transition amount? Will explain you. In case of the transition amount, if there is a transition gain means credit balance, then in 5 years you have to add. Suppose transition gain or transition credit balance, transition amount credit balance is 1 crore. So you have to add in 5 years 20 lakh, 20 lakh, 20 lakh, 20 lakh, 20 lakh. If debit balance, then you have to reduce that 20 lakh, 20 lakh, 20 lakh, 20 lakh. That is called one-time adjustment. And it has to be from the year in which first time you have opted the Ind AS. Now what do you mean by the transition amount here? Transition amount means adjusted to the other equity. Adjustment to the other equity, but just you have to ignore the capital reserve and security premium adjustment. You have to ignore the capital reserve and security premium adjustment. Here I also mentioned that equity component of compounding financial instrument, just ignore that. Just ignore that equity component of compounding financial instrument, just you have to ignore that. So what I am saying that what do you mean by the transition amount? All people just pay attention. Transition amount means adjustment in the other equity, simple word, reserve and surplus. Now, from other equity, you have to ignore the adjustment related to capital reserve as well as the security premium reserve. And also you have to ignore the adjustment related to the 5 item. First, if any adjustment related to any item of the OCI and which will be reclassified to the P&L account, you have to ignore. Second is revaluation surplus, you have to ignore. Third is the loss or gain related to the equity instrument designated at fair value through OCI, you have to ignore. One is the adjustment related to the property, plant and equipment or intangible asset recorded at fair value deemed cost in accordance with the paragraph D5 or D7 of Ind AS 101, you have to ignore. And adjustment related to investment in subsidiary or joint venture or associate recorded at fair value as deemed cost, you have to ignore that. And last, if any cumulative translation difference related to foreign operation, you have to ignore that for taking the transition amount. So guys, all people please pay attention. Transition amount means adjustment in other equity other than capital reserve and security premium. But guys, you have to ignore the 5 item also. Adjustment related to OCI item which will be reclassified to P&L, just ignore that. Revaluation surplus, ignore that. Fair value of equity instrument, just ignore that. And next part, if there is a PP or intangible asset recorded at fair value, fair value as deemed cost as per the Ind AS 101, that you have to ignore that. And last, investment in the subsidiary or joint venture and all, adjustment related to that, you have to ignore that. Now question is that MAT is not applicable on this item. Guys, on this item MAT will be applicable in the year in which that asset is retired, sold, discarded or like a demolished or whatever. In that year MAT will be applicable. And first item, that item is related to that item will be reclassified to P&L. In that case, on that adjustment, MAT will be applicable in the year in which you will reclassify that item to the P&L. And in the last case, that is the foreign operation, in the year of disposal of foreign operation, MAT is applicable. You got my point or not? Yes. So this is the completion of your MAT. Convergence date means the 1st April of the first year in which you have opted the Ind AS, and first year is treated as your convergence year. You got my point or not? Yes. Now next part is related to the, sir, question is that, sir, is MAT, what is the meaning of the MAT credit? So guys, MAT credit means whenever your MAT is more than normal income tax. If your MAT is more than the normal income tax, then you will get the MAT credit. Now whatever MAT credit you can carry forward for the 15 years, but MAT credit will be utilized only in the year in which your normal income tax is higher than MAT. And to the extent MAT, normal income tax is higher than MAT, in that case whatever difference, that difference you can set up against the MAT credit. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand MAT is not applicable if company opted section 115 BAA or BAB. 115 BAA or BAB we already discussed in the first topic. So if any company followed the 115 BAA or BAB, in that case MAT credit is not applicable. Now question is that, sir, is MAT is applicable to all type of company? Answer is yes. MAT is applicable to all company. Is MAT is applicable to foreign company also? Answer is yes. MAT is applicable to foreign company. But in case of foreign company, there are two exceptions. All people please pay attention. Suppose if foreign company paid the taxes under section 44B, that is shipping company, shipping business of foreign company, or 44BB or 44BB or 44BBB. This four section we already discussed under the head PGBP. So if foreign company having the income of that nature and they are declaring income as per that presumptive basis taxation at the 7.5%, 5%, 10% of your receipt and all, in that case MAT is not applicable. And second point, if any foreign company, all people just pay attention, theoretical question they may ask in the examination, any foreign company is a resident of foreign company, any foreign company is a resident of foreign country, and with that foreign country India have the DTAA, means India is having DTAA with that particular foreign country, and that foreign company is don't have any PE in India, foreign company is don't have any PE, that is permanent establishment in India, in that case on that company MAT is not applicable. And second point, if foreign company is resident of any foreign country with which India don't have any DTAA, but that company is not required any registration as per companies law in India, in that case MAT is not applicable to that foreign company also. You got my point or not? Yes. So this is your completion of your MAT topic. This is completion of your MAT topic. Now next topic is a AMT. Question is that, is AMT is applicable to all SSC? Answer is yes, except company. Except company, AMT is applicable to all company. Sorry, AMT is applicable to all SSC except company. AMT is applicable to all SSC except company. Now, AMT charging section is 115JC. 115JC is saying that whatever tax as per normal provision or adjusted total income multiply by 18.5%. Guys, here it's 18.5% only. In MAT rate is 15%, but here it is 18.5% only. So 18.5% of adjusted total income, whichever is higher, like SSC is required to pay. Now try to understand how to calculate the ATI, that is adjusted total income. So for calculation of adjusted total income, it's very simple. Just take the net taxable income, that is called total income as per normal provision, means as per the Income Tax Act. Just take the total income, and that total income will be increased by 3 deductions. Suppose if you claim 35 AD deduction, just add back. Suppose if you claim 10 AA deduction, just add back. And suppose if you claim any deduction in respect of income from 80 IA to 80 RRB, just add back except 80P. And when they are disallowing here 35 AD deduction, then just you have to reduce that depreciation allowable if section 35 AD is not there. You have to reduce the depreciation if section 35 AD is not there. Just reduce that depreciation amount, remaining will be your adjusted total income. On that adjusted total income, you have to pay the tax at the rate 18.5%. Is surcharge is applicable? Answer is yes. That depends on the person to person and depends on the adjusted total income. If adjusted total income is more than 50 lakh or 1 crore, then surcharge is applicable obviously. Now next part is related to, next part says that AMT is not applicable. AMT is not applicable if individual HUF, AOP, BOI, artificial juridical person, if your adjusted total income is up to 20 lakh, if your adjusted total income is up to 20 lakh, in that case AMT is not applicable. Now guys, try to understand, whenever in examination you find any question related to the 10 AA or 80 IA to 80 RRB or 35 AD, then always remember that there is a that there is a question of AMT, because if they ask a question related to computation of tax liability and they have not mentioned that ignore AMT, then always assume that this question is a AMT question. First you have to calculate tax as per normal provision, and after that you have to calculate tax at the rate 18.5% on the adjusted total income. AMT credit is similar to the MAT credit, 15 years you can carry forward. Now try to understand, if any unlisted company is converted into the LLP, then whatever AMT any unlisted company is converted into the LLP, then whatever MAT credit of that company cannot be carried forward by that LLP. Now try to understand, AMT credit you can set up in the year in which AMT is not applicable also. Suppose in current year, any individual HUF, AOP, BOI, their income is less than, their adjusted total income is less than 20 lakhs. So obviously AMT is not applicable, but there is a AMT credit. So can you set up that AMT credit against your tax payable? Answer is yes, you can do that, no problem at all. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand, if your unit is located in IFSC If your unit is located in IFSC, in that case your AMT rate will be 9% instead of 18.5%, and if your income is solely in the convertible foreign exchange. Now cooperative society you have to do at your home. Now next topic is related to deduction under section 10AA. 10AA is related to the SEZ unit. So SEZ unit section 10AA is saying that suppose if any assessee engaged in the manufacturing business or software production business, means manufacturing of software, or they are engaged in the manufacturing business, in manufacturing of any article or things, then deduction is allowed under section 10AA. Now this deduction is allowed for 15 years. For first 5 year of operation, 100% of export profit. Next 5 year of operation, 50% of export profit, and next 5 years of operation, 50% of export profit or amount credited to the SEZ reinvestment reserve account. So like 0 to 5, 100% of export profit. Next 6 to 10 is 50% of export profit, and 11 to 15 will be your 50% of export profit or amount credited to the SEZ reinvestment reserve. Whichever is lower will be your deduction. Now what do you mean by the export profit? So here export profit means whatever PGBP income of the unit located in SEZ multiply by export turnover divided by total turnover. What I am saying that PGBP income of unit located in SEZ multiply by export turnover divided by total turnover. But try to understand, export turnover will include only that turnover which is realized or recovered in India up to within 6 months from the end of the previous year in convertible foreign currency. So suppose I can take an example, we have made the export of 20 crore, but out of that only 15 crore is recovered within 6 months after the date of the like completion of previous year, like till 30th September. Suppose they received only 80 crore, then export turnover will be considered as 80 crore only, but in total turnover you will include total 100 crore. Now try to understand, if you have started any account outside India with the permission of RBI and amount is deposited in that particular account, then it is assumed that it is like that money is bring into the India within the time prescribed, that is 6 months from the end of the previous year. Now try to understand that time limit is 6 months from the end of the previous year, and if it is enhanced by the RBI, if RBI permit the more time, then obviously here also they will get the more time. Now try to understand, in export turnover as well as total turnover, in export turnover as well as total turnover, you should not include the freight or insurance or telecommunication charges or any expenditure incurred for providing output service. So what I am saying that in total turnover as well as export turnover, you should not consider the freight, insurance, telecommunication charges or any expenses incurred for providing the output service, like output service. Now try to understand one more thing. Sir, you are saying that you have to create the SEZ reinvestment reserve, then only deduction is available in previous year 11 to 15. Now try to understand what will be the use of that reserve. So that reserve use should be for the acquisition of new plant and machinery, and that new plant and machinery you should acquire and put to use within 3 years from the end of the previous year in which reserve was created. So suppose reserve is created in current year, then next 3 years you have to acquire and put to use that plant and machinery. Suppose if you have misutilized that amount in the year of misutilization, again that income will be taxable under the head PGBP. Or suppose if after the expiry within the 3 year you have not acquired the plant and machinery and not put to use, in that case in the 4th year whatever amount, that amount will be taxable under the head PGBP. You got my point or not? Yes. After that there is a clarification of the CBDT. There is a circular number 1/2013. Now this circular is saying that sir, suppose if any software is developed at client place outside India, then also deduction is available under this section. Answer is yes. Or suppose if you are providing just manpower at client place, you are just providing the manpower at client place and you are charging per like a man hour or per person you are charging from that foreign foreign enterprise. Now question is that then also you are eligible to claim this exemption. Answer is yes, you can claim this deduction, no problem at all. Now try to understand, suppose you are transferring your unit from one SEZ to another SEZ within that 15 years. So in remaining time, can you claim the deduction in new SEZ? Answer is yes, you can claim the deduction in new SEZ. But try to understand here one thing very important, all people please pay attention. Suppose like 6-year deduction is already claimed in one SEZ, then remaining 9-year deduction can be claimed in the new SEZ. You got my point or not? Yes. Now try to understand one more very interesting part. This deduction under section 10AA is available at the last means after GTI. In the first you will take the 5 head income, after take the GTI minus all deduction, ATC and all deduction. Last deduction will be the 10AA deduction. Okay, so thanks a lot people, that's enough for